Welcome to the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast, where timeless biblical truths meet modern leadership. We are thrilled to have you join us on this journey of exploring how biblical principles can guide us in leading with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Whether you're leading in the church, your workplace, or your community, this podcast is designed to inspire, challenge, and equip you for the road ahead. Let's dive into today's conversation and discover how Scripture shapes the way we lead.
Welcome back to Biblical Perspectives for Leadership. Today we're going to be looking at a pretty compelling story from Genesis chapter 21.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to unpack the leadership principles that are just kind of woven through this ancient text.
Absolutely.
See how it really resonates with our lives today.
Yeah, the story we'll be looking at is titled Grace for the Promised and the Cast Out in Genesis chapter 21, verses 1 through 21.
Okay.
And it's really much more than a historical account.
Yeah.
It really is a rich source of wisdom, particularly when we look at the dynamics between Sarah and Hagar,
right,
Isaac and Ishmael, and so many insights into leadership and decision-making and the broader concept of compassion.
I think that's a great point, especially that idea of compassion. And that's really what we want to focus on in this deep dive, is extracting these valuable lessons on leadership and everyday life from this narrative. How does promise and provision play out in unexpected ways?
Yeah.
So let's start at the very beginning with the fulfillment of a long-awaited promise, the birth of Isaac.
Yeah. So we see this unfold in Genesis chapter 21, verse 1. The Lord visited Sarah, as he had said. And what's so striking right away is that emphasis on the certainty and the timing of God's word.
Yeah.
And that speaks volumes to us on, the importance of reliability and keeping commitments, don't you think? I mean, when a leader, or really anyone for that matter, follows through on their word, it builds trust.
Absolutely. And speaking of following through on promises, Sarah conceived and bore Isaac to Abraham in his old age, Genesis chapter 21, verse 2. And he was 100 years old.
Wow.
This fulfilled the covenant promise that was made earlier in Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. Can you imagine the improbability?
Yeah, it really highlights how sometimes the most significant outcomes seem utterly impossible from a human perspective.
I mean, yeah, you think about it. He was 100 years old. It's just something that you just wouldn't expect to happen.
No.
It's interesting how Abraham responds in Genesis chapter 21, verse 3. He names the child Isaac, which means laughter.
Oh, that's right.
And it reminds us of Sarah's initial skepticism and then their ultimate joy. So in a leadership context, I mean, how does that, acknowledging past doubts and celebrating those unexpected successes, how can that be helpful?
Oh, it's incredibly unifying for a team or a family.
Yeah, I can see that.
Or any group working together.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then the story continues. Genesis chapter 21, verse 4. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him.
Right.
And this act follows God's command from Genesis chapter 17, verse 12. And it was just a very clear sign of Isaac's inclusion in that covenant. And you see that theme of, clear roles and belonging.
Yeah.
Within any structure. I mean, even if it's a family unit or an organization.
That's right. It gives people a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And identity and purpose.
Definitely.
Within that larger structure.
Yeah. And then Sarah's reaction is recorded in Genesis chapter 21, verses 6 and 7. And she says, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And then she adds, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. It's just that joyful surprise that speaks to the transformative power of a fulfilled promise.
Yeah, after a long period of waiting, too.
Especially after a long period of waiting.
Yeah. As leaders, recognizing and celebrating the impact of our commitments being realized is so important for morale and motivation.
I think that's such a good point. But now the story takes kind of a turn. And we see conflict between Sarah and Hagar, which really, I think, offers some really complex insights into leadership and how do you manage all those interpersonal dynamics. So starting in Genesis chapter 21, verse 8, we see some tension that starts to arise.
Yeah, in Genesis chapter 21, verse 8, we read, the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. And so this is a significant milestone marking Isaac's kind of increasing independence.
Right.
But this celebration becomes a backdrop for conflict.
Well, because in Genesis chapter 21, verse 9, we read that Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing with her son Isaac. And so the Hebrew word here, metzahek, can actually mean more than just innocent play.
Oh, really?
It can imply mocking or even a sense of rivalry.
Oh.
And Sarah's perception of this interaction is what drives the next events. And I think it reminds us that in any leadership situation, that just differing interpretations of events can cause some major conflict.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Conflicting perspectives.
Yeah.
Huge challenges for anybody leading a group.
Definitely. And Sarah's reaction in Genesis chapter 21, verses 10 and 11 is very decisive. She says, "Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac." And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. And you just really feel Abraham's distress here. You know, he's torn between his love for both of his sons and then Sarah's demand.
That's got to be hard.
It's a tough situation, and it illustrates a challenge I think all leaders face. Navigating difficult personnel issues where feelings and strategic objectives just clash.
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in.
It is. But then in Genesis chapter 21, verses 12 and 13, God intervenes. God says to Abraham, "Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwomen. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman because he is your seed." And so I think this highlights that sometimes really difficult decisions have to be made to align with the larger purpose.
And even when those decisions cause immediate personal pain.
Exactly, even when they cause pain. And you see this reference to Isaac as the line through whom descendants shall be called is later echoed in Romans chapter 9, verses 7 and 8 in the New Testament. And so that really emphasizes the specific nature of this promise.
Right. But what's interesting is that God's response isn't just about the promise through Isaac.
Yeah.
He also makes provision for Ishmael. Yet, I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your offspring. This shows that compassion and care extend beyond just the primary focus.
Yes.
So good leadership often involves recognizing the needs and the potential of those, even if they're not in the central strategic path.
That's so important because it's so easy to get focused on the one thing and then forget about the needs of others who are maybe in the periphery.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah, and so we come to this scene in Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 through 16, where Hagar and Ishmael are sent away. The story says that Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And eventually their water runs out, and you just see this picture of complete desperation. Hagar puts Ishmael under a bush because she can't bear to watch him die.
That is heartbreaking.
It's a very difficult passage.
Yeah.
And in this moment of vulnerability, Genesis chapter 21, verses 17 through 21, we see God intervene. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." And it just reinforces that even in what seems like an abandoned situation, there's still hope.
There's always hope. And as leaders, remembering the human element and offering support, even when difficult separations occur, it's just crucial.
Absolutely. And then you see this miraculous provision in Genesis chapter 21, verse 19. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad drink. A well appearing in the wilderness. It's just this powerful symbol of unexpected resources and a new beginning, even in a crisis.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful.
And the story concludes in Genesis chapter 21, verses 20 and 21, with Ishmael growing up in the wilderness of Paran. He becomes an archer, and Hagar finds him a wife from the land of Egypt. And this signifies his separate path from the covenant line, but it also highlights God's continued care and provision for him. So leadership isn't always about, that single focused path. Sometimes it's about acknowledging and supporting different journeys.
Different journeys.
And I think that's important too, because we can sometimes get so focused on our goals that we forget that people may have different paths.
Right, and that their path may be just as valid and important.
Absolutely. So as we kind of conclude this deep dive into Genesis chapter 21, we've seen this powerful demonstration of God's faithfulness to his promises through Isaac. But at the same time, his compassion extends to Hagar and Ishmael. And, you really see this leadership idea that comes through, this idea that effective leadership often involves navigating situations where strategic goals and human empathy have to be balanced.
They're both so important.
Yeah, it's not always easy. So How do we balance those primary objectives with showing care to those who may be outside of our immediate sphere of responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And I love how that provision of the well for Ishmael in the wilderness shows us that even when circumstances seem really dire, that new possibilities and resources to move forward can emerge sometimes in the most unexpected ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It really encourages a broader perspective in leadership to look beyond those immediate limitations.
Yeah.
And to really trust in the potential for solutions that we might not be able to see right now.
So as you think about this story and you think about this idea of leadership, how might these principles inform how you lead and how you support those around you, even those whose paths might diverge from your primary focus?
That's a great question for all of us to consider.
It is.
Thank you for joining us on the Biblical Perspectives for Leadership podcast. I hope today's insights have encouraged and equipped you to lead with faith, wisdom, and purpose. Remember, the greatest leader of all time taught us that true leadership is about serving others. If you enjoyed this episode and podcast, be sure to subscribe, share it with others, and leave a review. It helps us reach more people with these transformative truths. Until next time, keep leading with grace and walking in purpose.